Ladies and gentlemen, gamers, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is a pretty exciting one. We have a CO3 patch releasing today. By the time you see this video, the patch will have already been released. But I want to cover the balance update stream by Relic Entertainment. We're going to hear from the gameplay designers exactly what they have in store for CO3. And hopefully, guys, there's some big changes coming around the corner. I haven't seen this video yet, but I'm excited to dive into it with you guys. After this video, I'm going to jump into the patch notes themselves. I'm going to read through them. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and let's jump in.
So what are we covering today? Jason, you already teased it. We're going to be covering one of CO3's first balance updates. That's why we have these folks here with us today. We'll be going over some of the sort of high-level decisions behind these changes as we discuss some of the trends and feedback we've been seeing from players. So please ask your questions in the chat, and we will answer what we can. I'm sure we won't get to everything, but because there's a lot to cover. But before we kind of really get into things, one of the things I want to address up front is that we know players want to see and hear more from us. After launch, the community team and myself, we were caught up with reporting and supporting hotfixes and feedback analysis, and that made communication a little bit more difficult with all of you. So we've recently reorganized and are taking steps to be more communicative moving forward. This live stream is one of those first steps, and we hope to offer insights and showcases and discussions with the team more regularly. And you're going to want to stay tuned because after we have this balanced conversation, we're going to be showing you an updated development priorities chart. So our goal is to have a steady cadence of news for you moving forward. So lots of exciting stuff to get to today. First up, question for both of you. Before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of this update, I wanted to do just a bit of a kind of a check-in with both of you to see how things have been going since launch. I know it's been very hectic for the team, but have you had a chance to play much, or are you kind of just like head down in the back-end tools? Jason, are you playing against people that aren't developers?
Please tell me they're playing. I hope they're playing.
I've managed to sneak in quite a few games. I think I have around 100-ish. But at the start of from launch onwards, I was able to keep up with some of our community members, but now they're giving me a real hard time.
Yeah, we can get into that in a little bit. What about you, Marco? Are you playing a bunch, or are you just kind of just work?
Yeah, I'm actually focusing a little bit more on work, and I play a lot our internal builds rather than the main game. But I do play the game at least like weekly.
Amazing.
I do play games.
Yeah, same thing. I've been very busy with work, but I do sneak in matches against real people when I can.
We need these guys playing.
So with the game now out, I'm very curious what both of your areas of focus are. What kind of keeps you busy day to day? Jason, again, let's maybe start with you.
Sure.
What's your sort of area of focus right now?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, I'm the balance lead, so I'm working very much to try and improve the balance in the game. We'll dive a little bit into what that actually means later, but yeah, a lot of work, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of staring at the game stats, but yeah, a lot of just balance.
Amazing. Marco, what about you? I know Jason's domain is balance, but I know you're kind of focused more on design. Do you want to maybe cover off like what your area of focus is right now?
My area is 360 degrees, so pretty much the entire game. I'm mostly focusing on features, improving existing features and working on new features, which hopefully you'll be hearing about very soon. But sometimes I also help out with balance tips here and there.
Amazing. And again, you're both obviously very skilled players, so I imagine you'll have a lot of input on what we're discussing today with our latest balance update, which is coming soon. So Jason, I know one of the things that you kind of want to talk about, we're going to kind of start high level before we get into, like I said, the sort of the nuts and bolts. But I know one of the things that you want to talk about was the team's kind of approach to balance in CO3. I'm kind of curious if you can expand on what that approach is and how we're going to go about it, sort of or how we have been going about it and how we want to keep working on that, moving forward. So what's that approach?
Yeah. So, just before we start, I think we've had a few conversations earlier, but this is our first time really talking to the wider community about what we want to do, what our goals for balance are. Now, before I go into them, the team is aware that there is a bit of a distance between where we want to be and where we are right now. The team's working very hard to, close that distance. We want to take an iterative approach where we step in the right direction slowly to get to the point that we want to be. But in terms of what that is, what we're looking to aim for is kind of 3 or so major goals. One of which is faction and unit diversity. So we want players to be able to use a wide range of different units and different tools, different strategies between battle groups, units, abilities, all that kind of stuff. We really want to see a wide variety of them in all of our different modes. The second kind of point is we want to have flexible build orders this time around. A lot of the time in prior titles, you very much had a paved road in terms of what your golden path to victory was. We want to add in some elements where players are adapting to what each other are building, so that we have a little bit more back and forth on the macro level, not just on the tactical level. And mentioning the tactical level, the third final point is kind of to maintain the tactical integrity of the game. While we are trying to add all of these strategic elements of what you build, what strategies you go for, a very key component of Co is simply using your units to their maximum potential, right? Tactics, so things like proper positioning relative to the environment, using shot blockers, sight blockers, flanking your opponent, right? Range, all that kind of things. Those need to be, those need to retain their importance. And even if you might not have the best strategy, we still want to make sure that skill still matters and wins at the end of the day. So there's a lot to this, as many of you might know. So we're going to work towards this. And we've hit this to different degrees and different modes and different parts in the game right now.
Okay, I just want to say something real quick about what Jason has just described. He's saying, and this is very important for RTS games, he's saying that you should have the tech options to be able to divert your strategy both from a reactionary standpoint and a proactive standpoint, right? If you want to open the game with a very tuned build order, you should be able to have a very specific way that you can tech and execute certain strategies with certain units, right? And vice versa. Reactionary play, reactionary build orders are obviously going to vary between factions. The Wehrmacht is very reactionary, so they should have a little bit more flexibility with their build orders. But from an overall game design standpoint, it's extremely important to have those options. Whereas in Code 2, the tech options were relatively linear. You just went to the next tech path, you unlocked those units, and you could use those units. There wasn't much variety in terms of build order execution. Now, the one thing I will say about this is the problem with Code 3 is that you have, let's look at the British, for example. You have the boys, right, the infantry sections. What is your reason for not building those and scaling those into the late game? They're just so strong. The issue is that I find in a lot of the Code 3 late game units is that they're too weak. Like even the elite infantry in the late game, the tier 3, tier 4 infantry for each faction is so weak that like I have no incentive to even purchase them, right? The fact that they're more expensive and available in the late game should mean that they hit the battlefield with a impact, and they have a value and power to them that's not less than the infantry sections, which are literally the first unit in the game. So I feel like for build orders and variety and tech tree options, for that to work, there needs to be more emphasis on specific late game units and their ability and impact in the game. That's just my take, my opinion, but I'd like to see more of that.
So I'm kind of curious if we can talk about what are some of the big picture. So we talked about approach, but like, what are some of the big picture like design goals for Code 3's balance? How does that apply to factions and play styles, build orders, gameplay? Let's maybe start with Marco, and then we can get into Jason's answer. Marco, what's kind of your take on design goals for balance, especially with multiplayer?
Yeah. So the gameplay team has a few pillars that we follow when we are both designing and balancing the game, and two of which are particularly important to us right now, especially when it comes down to balance. And they are that strategy should always be dexterity. So we are not a game where APMs matter as much as in other titles.
I agree.
Instead, we want to emphasize the strengths of our games, where positioning your units, using the environment, physics, cover, they really matter a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And when we fall short on that, we want to address that. And the other part is that we really want to make a game where diversity and variety of unit is a key component. So we want different strategies to work and to be viable. at every level of play. This means, of course, that we need to spend a lot of time to balance different strategies and prevent one to taking over the others. And that's why, as Jason was saying, we need to take an iterative approach. It just won't be one patch solves every problem.
Right.
It will be more like we need to work with players together to make the balance better and make different strategies work.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. I kind of was thinking about some of the things that you mentioned there about like, strategy sort of beating out like, reflexes and things like tactical gameplay, and positioning are so some of those like really, really key things that we're focused on. So I know we're really excited to get into patch notes, folks. We're not going to go over patch notes line by line. Sorry to disappoint. Like I said, we're going to kind of cover them at a high level. And then you can see notes soon, TM. So when it comes to player feedback, I know we get that in a number of different ways. My team is trying to capture all of that from forums and social and Discord and videos and live streams and things like that, and then we're kind of reporting back those top issues to you folks and the wider team. Jason, let's start with you on this. I'm kind of curious how you're interpreting a lot of that feedback, or maybe what is it that you're even like hearing from players, or what are you actually seeing? Maybe it's in your matches or in other people's matches. Let's maybe start with some of those pros that we're kind of seeing and some of those trends that we're seeing, and then we can kind of get into some of the cons. So what are like the good things that you're seeing?
Yeah. So there's quite a few different avenues that we've been looking at the game. We've been playing the game a lot, both externally and internally. And we do listen. We might not engage as often for the balance team in particular, but we are listening. We do see a lot of the posts going around, some of the funny ones, some of the not so great ones. We see them all. But like in terms of the state of the game, some of the good parts we're seeing right now is we're really seeing people really start to dive into a lot of the funnier mechanics of what the different factions can do. Some of them are taking what we built and taking them very far and abusing them. So we're seeing a lot of different kinds of builds come out. Not all of them are quite the same level of power or viability, and that's one of the things we want to adjust. A lot of variety. And another cool thing is like in the different modes, so like from 1v1 to 4v4, we're seeing a very different playstyle emerge for all of the different factions.
Right.
One or two factions are playing similarly, but a lot of them have very different strats depending on what mode you're going, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And that's something we want to support.
I know you also said that you were encountering a lot of weird strategies in your own games, and you're like, why am I getting beat by this?
Yeah. I have a few stories of like people doing some really weird stuff and like catching me off guard.
Yeah. What about you, Marco? What are some of the good things that maybe you're seeing from players or from the community?
So I'm definitely seeing the community and players experimenting a lot more. Some of our community content creators are putting out amazing videos about how our mechanics work. Not all of them actually work as in previous games. For example, like how grenades interact with cover. That's the newest one.
Referencing tightrope.
Apparently. So I'm amazed that by their capacity to discover, and I'm also like really impressed by their velocity to discover our content. We have a huge game for factions and a lot of units, and I actually expected them to take quite a few months before actually nailing down on which units were the best ones, and instead it took them just weeks.
Yeah.
Both for better and for worse.
For better and for worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's maybe talk about some of those things that like maybe we're not super happy with in terms of balance and gameplay. So I know you got a pretty long list, Jason.
In terms of the cons, right? Some ones come to mind in terms of we have some first order strategies that are clearly beating out all of the rest. They're kind of suffocating the room. Everyone is mentioning. I've seen so many memes of like Jaeger spam versus boys spam, right?
Right.
That Uno meme is still in my head. It's so funny. But like so that's an example of a issue because it's killing diversity and it's also kind of a low engagement, low tactics kind of strategy that is beating arguably harder strategies, right?
Exactly.
In terms of other issues, like we're seeing certain factions have key imbalances. Some ones we'll touch on later is like the Germans early game are a little bit not where we want them to be. The Americans in some of the larger team games, particularly in the mid game, not really cutting it, faltering. So yeah, some of these things.
Americans in the mid game are not cutting it. I feel like American late game is weaker than their mid game. I feel like the American early and mid game is strong. That was an interesting take.
We're definitely looking at. We want to change, and we'll talk about some of the changes coming up soon.
Yeah, I'd also want to add that part of the problem with these strategies is that they suffocate other possible viable strategies that are maybe a little bit more complex to use. So, for example, with the Boy-City Rifle spam or the Jaeger spam, they are powerful and easy to actually do, and they suffocate other possible and viable strategies. As, for example, in the last patch, we have buffed a lot of other units, but we haven't seen them used a lot because those strategies are still too strong.
Gotcha. So I know one of the big things that we're working towards is hitting a good cadence for balance updates. I know this first one kind of maybe took longer than we would have wanted, but I know we want to get to a more regular cadence so that players know when to expect them and so that they're coming more regularly. For this update in particular, Jason, can you maybe talk about some of like the really high level goals for what we wanted to do with this balance update?
So we had a few major goals. The big three being we knew that certain unit classes were just they just weren't very good. They weren't performing well. So the big one we're tackling this patch is team weapons. So particularly heavy machine guns and anti-tank guns. The other class that we know is not quite great, but we've only made more minor adjustments, is the light vehicles. They're kind of a mixed bag right now, so we want to continue to make adjustments. We have some really key faction imbalances, like the ones we mentioned before with the boys, the Jaegers, early game, etc. Again, we'll dive into them a little bit later. And then the final one is like, battle groups. And like a lot of the variety, some battle groups were just not being used, and for good reason. So we're bringing them up to par.
You know, one interesting thing about RTS design, and Jason's mentioning light vehicles, so it reminded me of this, is generally speaking in RTS games, it's very good to speed up the early game. You don't want a long, drawn out, boring, monotonous early game. You saw this in StarCraft 2. The first two expansions had a basic economy, StarCraft economy, that literally would go on for like 5 minutes and nothing would transpire during those 5 minutes. You'd just be building workers, gathering resources, and then executing your build order. In the last expansion of StarCraft 2, they really sped up the economy and they allowed you to start with double the workers. So Company of Heroes has a really interesting issue in the early game, whereas it's not monotonous in the early game, but what they're trying to do with Company of Heroes 3 is really get the combat going quickly with more complex units like early vehicles, light vehicles. So you saw in Co3 compared to Co2, there's a lot more light vehicles that are available very, very quickly. And the issue with that, of course, is, okay, now how do we balance that? Because we want these vehicles to be available right away, but how do you balance that in relation to the infantry? So one is not overpowering the other, and it becomes very difficult, because if the light vehicles are too weak and they're not able to cap, then there's no incentive to build them, right? So they have to be not only balanced properly, but they also have to be working in terms of their physics with the terrain and everything very, very well. Otherwise, they become an issue. So it's a really good point. Like, light vehicles is an issue that has to be addressed, but I hope they can do it in a way where they still remain like high impact very early on, but in their own unique way where they're not abusive or irrelevant, right? So, okay, let's continue.
Amazing. So in terms of maybe ancillary goals, I know you had some sort of side objectives for this patch. I know you're kind of talking about like massed infantry, efficacy of anti-tank infantry. I know we'll get into that maybe in a little bit, but like high level, what are some of the thoughts there?
Yeah. So, and to quickly go through like the exercise of how we're looking at things. So from the highest level, I mentioned the three goals of like, unit diversity and like strategic diversity, right? Well, one of the problems was one of our key unit classes, team weapons and machine guns, weren't good. They weren't very powerful for what they wanted to do. So then
We got
we're
a
missing like a
PowerPoint.
key component that counters certain strategies. So the big one being just blobbing a bunch of infantry in a big group. If machine guns aren't really viable, then that's one of the main counters to that strategy missing. So when we saw this, this was killing diversity. Like the best strat was just to mass infantry and then shove it against your opponent. So then, one of the first things we looked at is, hey, is their counter working? And the answer was basically no. So we're doing a lot of changes to that class.
Right. So let's get into finally some actual specifics about what we want to cover here. Marco, I know you really want to talk about heavy machine guns and anti-tank guns, so maybe I'll just throw it to you and let you chat for a bit.
Yes, and actually, I'll relate that to also our approach to blobs. So the problem with heavy machine guns is that we have, and fighting blobs, is that we have a lot of levers to pull to improve the situation. And for this patch, we decided to actually go with buffing their capacity to suppress units, to ping units, and make them more reliable. Okay.
No, sorry.
To make them more reliable against other units, and also increase their survivability.
Right.
As that was also like a key part of that. But there are other changes to other systems, for example, smoke or forward reinforcements, which we'll touch on later probably, that are not direct changes to the heavy machine guns, but they have an effect on how they perform. So I'm sure that when the patch will drop, players will experience a very different relationship with team weapons. In regards to AT guns instead, we felt like AT guns were too easy to deal with, especially with vehicles. You could just outmaneuver them and they wouldn't be able to keep up. So some of the changes are aimed to make them more responsive when aiming and targeting vehicles.
Okay.
And also we are making them more reliable in hitting the targets and making them, like, especially on maps that have different elevations or obstacles, we are smoothing the experience much more. So I'm really looking forward to see how players will use that.
Yeah, and a quick note on the anti-tank guns. Like we're for now we're not gonna change how quickly they're getting killed by vehicles. I know that's a hot button topic with some of the community, but right now most of our changes are aimed to make the anti-tank guns much more scary to vehicles, particularly at long range. Because one of the issues in the game right now is that they tend to hit the terrain very often.
Right.
So hopefully with the changes that we put in, this should happen less. It'll still happen. Anti-tank guns won't be perfectly accurate, but they should be significantly more threatening to vehicles at range.
Right. So, and I imagine that's not something like we're not turning anti-tank guns into like sniper rifles, right? I imagine it's something that you'll need like scouting units or like vision provided by like flares or something else to like make the best use of them. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So let's maybe chat about some of the things that we're keeping an eye on. Because again, I know these are kind of like hot button issues.
Okay, so they didn't really go into detail on what exactly they changed for the machine guns, the MG teams, and the AT guns, but hopefully the patch notes will show that. We'll jump into that after. But I'm very curious to see how they address the MGs in particular, because the suppression mechanic in Co 3 is much different from Co 2. In Co 2, if you're suppressing an enemy unit and you have another rifleman next to your MG also shooting at that unit, that enemy unit will remain suppressed because it's under fire from another unit. So even if the MG picks up and moves, because you have another unit that was shooting at that suppressed unit, it will remain suppressed or at least hindered. In Co 3, the second your MG stops firing is literally like the second that the enemy unit is no longer suppressed. And I'm curious if they're going to re-implement that back into the game or if they're going to do something new altogether. But we'll check out the patch notes after. Let's jump back into the stream.
We've said that a couple of times.
Yes.
So I know massed infantry, or what we've already called blobbing a number of times, is
Very
often
professional term.
the very professional term. It's often an area of concern, right? In most RTS games, especially in Company of Heroes, where we want to focus on unit diversity and we were talking about like tactics and strategy over APM. So how are we addressing this now, and how are we maybe keeping an eye on it and hoping to address it like more in the future?
Yeah. So a few comments on blobs. So blobs have haunted all of the Coast series to various extents for different patches, right? But it is particularly bad right now. But in terms of dealing with blobs, there's the difficulty is there's a lot of different factors that kind of bleed into how much or the efficacy of blobs, basically. Like stuff like their counters, stuff like even as gentle as like the way the maps are laid out, to stuff like the time to kill, right? A lot of players probably have noticed from prior games, time to kill in Company of Heroes, particularly at longer ranges, is longer. So it kind of promotes concentrating your force a little bit more than before, which is something we're looking at. And one of the issues with tackling blobs is we definitely see this as a problem. But we're going to have to take multitudes of different steps at different places to reduce how much we're seeing this, because there's a lot of different elements that go into it. And the first one, this patch, again, we're going to be buffing machine guns. We also did a few other changes to some of the Jaegers and the Tommies that kind of reduce how much this is good. For example, a specific change is just we're removing for Tommies, when they're in the open, they no longer receive their veterancy bonus based on fire. They now need to be in cover in order to receive that bonus. That's just one example.
Right. So I think that kind of like segues really nicely into the next thing that we're keeping an eye on, which is forward reinforcement. Because I've encountered this in my games, and I'm just like, this is not fun.
We gotta fix it.
So let's talk about forward reinforcement and some of the changes that we're maybe making there. Because I feel like maybe in larger team games, this is more of a problem than it is in maybe 1v1s or even 2v2s. But I'm curious on your more professional take on this. Marco, do you have an opinion on this?
Absolutely. So I want to start with saying that the concept of forward reinforcement is something that has been in the game since the very first company views. We started with static places, the forward HQs. Then we had the Panzer Elite with the half tracks from which you could reinforce. And we got to this game where forward reinforcements are very powerful due to a bunch of reasons. Some of which are quality of life improvements, like auto reinforcing, so that you don't really have to micro this situation. They'll just be reinforced automatically. And the other one is also like other levers we have that are like upkeep, unit cost, reinforcements. So how are we approaching this problem? Because we see that players are having like a too easy time keeping their armies on the field and not retreating them. With the high level goal that we don't want like blobs to be as powerful as they are,
right.
We are making forward reinforcement take much longer when units are out on the field, when they are far from the HQ, and making them take even longer when they are in combat. So that means that players just won't be able to sustain prolonged combat, prolonged fights and still keep up with reinforcements and expect to win the engagement. They would be forced to go through.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So and we don't want to get rid of the playstyle entirely. We want to reward players who are investing in like logistics to take over like certain parts of the map. But right now, you can just reinforce in front of someone and you would win the fight because you would have more entities, right? So we're making it take slower. So again, if you're outside of your HQ zone, you will reinforce slower. Now, if you're in combat and outside of the zone, you will reinforce even slower than that.
Awesome. That's great to hear.
Make sure to tone it back, basically.
Okay.
I like that.
I mean, I think those are all positive changes, and just watching the chat, I think people are excited about that.
That's really exciting. They had a couple ways they can approach that adjustment. They ended up going with the way they approach that will not change the strategy necessarily. You could still play that style. It's just going to take longer. So the question is it still more valuable to have your unit on the front line with that supply truck reinforcing? or is it literally the same amount of time of going back to base and then back to the front line? I think it's still more valuable being on the front line and reinforcing, of course, which I like. I think this is a great change. The other way they could approach it is making the reinforcement on the front line more expensive, but that still doesn't necessarily change the abuse or it. And it's also not inherently obvious that you're paying more for these units, and it becomes problematic mechanically. Like you have this reinforcing unit, but it's now costing you so much to reinforce. So I think that they approached it very well. It's a really good first take on this, and I'm excited to see how it impacts the game.
So another thing we're keeping an eye on, and I know you already mentioned it, is light vehicles. So what's up with light vehicles right now, and maybe how should they feel after this update?
Yeah. So I did say at the very onset that we know this is another unit class that as a class isn't quite where it needs to be. But we've made a number of changes this patch, and we'll continue to make more changes in the future. Right now, light vehicles suffer from quite a few different problems. Their mobility quite isn't where they want to be. They're being their counters are a little bit overwhelming right now. So anti-tank rifles, Jaegers with the Panzerschrecks, etc. And also their offensive capability isn't quite where they want to be.
Yeah.
They also have the
100%.
problem that anti-tank guns have, where a lot of the time they're shooting the terrain in front of them. Their guns aren't reaching as far as the enemy.
Right.
And this actually has to do with blobbing as well, because in prior games, if you had a blob, even if the light vehicle or the tank guns would miss your target, it would hit another squad because they're all grouped together.
Yeah.
Right now, we're seeing a lot of time it just hits the ground in front of the target.
Right.
We're going to be adjusting this in the future, so hopefully this will also make light vehicles feel better and also tone blobs down even further.
Okay, so we're gonna have to wait for that, but that's good.
No, that's good. That's good to know. So let's maybe shift focus and actually talk about the factions in a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
At a high level, Jason, can you maybe identify we'll go through these one at a time,
Yeah.
but let's maybe talk about for each faction some of the high level problems and potential fixes. So let's maybe start with the British. I've got it right there, the boys' problem. So at a high level, what do you want to do with the British?
Yeah. So the boys are hitting the town too hard. They're everywhere. So we see it. So we're doing a few changes to tone them back. So one specific one, we're toning anti-tank rifle range is now going to be 35 instead of 40. So
That's really
so
good.
vehicles will actually now have room to actually kite weapons, or they'll just have more time to respond to infantry sections rolling up on them.
Good change.
This also has a side effect where they don't really volley at infantry from long range as much as they would before. Another really big change is we're doing very heavy reductions to how the training center works. So one of the problems before is you could spam your beginning infantry, give them a light upgrade, and then through the training center they would kind of become the best infantry in the game, basically.
Yeah, literally.
And that was not intended. That was kind of a whoopsies from us. So that's going to be toned back. So now Tommies are no longer going to be the best infantry unit scaling into the rest of the game. So as a
that's how
player,
it
you
should
can
be.
still spec very heavily into them. And they will give you a good power boost in the early to mid game, but they're not going to be nearly as good in the late game. And you're going to have to rely on other units. And for the other factions can start using their elite infantry or the elite units and really start pushing you back.
Right.
So hopefully with all of this, we can see a little bit more diversity.
Okay, yeah, no, that's good to hear. So Marco, let's maybe come at this from the design perspective. So I'm kind of curious, how should the British now function with these changes that we've kind of outlined here? Like maybe you can speak to how the British should play, or what some of the big picture design intent with the British has been or continues to be.
Not building one unit.
So at a high level, we do want British to still feel like the easiest faction to approach. When a new player plays the game, if they play British, they will have an easier time learning all the mechanics, learning all the unit roles. So, and in the last patch, we actually did already buff some of the units that are in the roster. So what we expect now is that toning the Boise rifles down and their interaction with Tommies with cover and with the training center, we expect that enemy factions will have more room to respond to that,
Right.
and put British more like in a problematic situations when they have to find solutions, and B, that you open up the actual roster of other units, especially the mid-game vehicles like the Humber, the Stewart, that already have a pretty unique role, and also the elite infantry like guards, like commandos, like Gurkhas, who are already pretty good, but they were
Thank
completely
God.
overshadowed by how easy it was to play with the Tommies and their AT rifle upgrade and the training center upgrade.
So much better.
Yeah, no, it's good to know. I mean, all of that's like really awesome information. But what I really want to know is what my build order should be now.
Figure it out.
Well, given we are actually also buffing HMGs,
Yeah.
I think that now British players should rely on a bit more on combined arms early game.
Right.
So have a mix of Tommies, HMGs, and suppers. And also we are actually we fixed the bug with the Dingo, if I recall correctly, where now it actually uses like it is granted the training center
Yep.
upgrades. So now it's also going to scale a little bit more. But we're also like, as Jason was mentioning, some of the changes to light vehicles are actually impacting the unique roles of some units. So
Right.
for example, the CWT truck, when you upgrade it, now it can become very good to fight against airplanes. So you now have more like specific weapons to fight certain threats.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about U.S. forces.
Real quick, I just want to say about the British, it's going to feel so much better to be able to utilize not only combined arms in the early game between your engineers, your MG teams, and your infantry sections. The game is going to feel much more tactical in that regard. But also, like Marco pointed out, the mid game vehicles like the Humber and the Stewart were kind of overshadowed by the AT rifles, just spamming and moving that blob around. It was really unfortunate, and it's so nice to be able to choose a tech in the game, in the mid game, and say I'm gonna go straight for that tech. I'm gonna sacrifice a little bit of early game tempo or army value. I'm gonna go straight for that tech and make an impact in the game in a specific timing, utilizing my micro, this window of opportunity with this vehicle. It's gonna feel so much better. So I'm excited for that. What I'm confused about is, once again, this U.S. forces underperforming in the mid game. This is not something I was aware of. I always thought the U.S. forces suffered in the late game, but maybe this is not so much about the riflemen. It could be. Maybe it's about the light vehicles, including the Chaffee and maybe the Greyhound. I don't know. I find this strange. Maybe they want to push the direction in a different way. But yeah, let's see what they have in store for the U.S.
It sounds like, Jason, that they're not doing as hot in the mid game as you want them to be. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so USF has faced some systemic issues in the larger games. We built them around an emphasis around like mobility, being able to pick your fights, right? But we found that, with the ways our maps work and how players are engaging with the larger modes, it's been really difficult for USF to find what they need.
Right.
So that they've just been lackluster. So some changes we're doing is, for example, both the Greyhound and the Chaffee are receiving buffs. The buffs to the machine guns and AT guns will also help them quite a lot. They're also receiving some bonuses to, for example, their tax for ISC. Bars are going to be either cheaper or a little bit faster to build. So a lot of quality of life, just slight increases for the power for this faction. There's probably still quite a little bit more to go in terms of getting the USF to play just right in terms of the team games. So it's going to be an ongoing process for this one. But hopefully these changes should be a healthy step in the right direction.
Okay, so something that we're
That makes sense. So it's a design choice to kind of highlight more of the U.S. mid-game vehicles. That makes a lot of sense. So I wasn't necessarily thinking that, but yeah, that's a pretty cool change. And I hope that makes a big impact of not needing to use the same battle group over and over and over for the U.S.
going to kind of keep an eye on and keep adjusting in the future if need be. Marco, so same question. What's sort of the design intent, or how do we want the USF to be functioning from a design perspective after this patch?
So I think we have all seen that USF have succeeded or are succeeded with more very specific strategies. that are not necessarily easy to counter. So some of the one of the goal was to make more options viable in the mid game that players could pursue rather than just go this strategy because that's the
Okay.
only way you can use to win.
That makes
And
sense.
actually, that specific one is being toned down with some changes to the sniper and the M16 quad half track.
Yep.
So when we approached, for example, the light vehicles, we identified that, for example, the Chaffee was one of the units that was not performing as expected, and we really tried to boost it to a level where we felt more comfortable.
It
And the other
constantly
one is
misses
that
its shot.
We since Company Heroes 1, we wanted Riflemen to really be a very flexible unit that can scale a lot through upgrades. So we are making their upgrades a little bit easier to access, while also reducing some of the more negative impact on their abilities. I mentioned the Porid on them. That was really good at suppressing units.
Yep.
We are nerfing that. But to compensate for that nerf, we are also buffing the long and mid-range power of the BARs.
I like that.
Okay.
No more one rifleman Ramboing against 3 Panzer
Yeah.
Grenadier squads and the like.
Exactly.
Okay, let's maybe move to the Axis factions. So, Jason, it seems like the Wehrmacht are kind of locked into how they have to open their games. I know you were chatting with me beforehand. You were saying it's really inflexible. So, what are we doing here to try and address this?
So there are kind of 2 major changes that we wanted to do to the Wehrmacht on this patch. One was to smooth out the early game a little bit. Even though it was kind of survivable, it very much gave the player no agency. It very much was you just had to take whatever your opponent was giving you. So now we're giving the Grenadiers a little bit of an adjustment so that it's easier for you to navigate through the early game.
Thank
The
God.
machine gun buffs again should really help the Wehrmacht out in particular because they have the best machine gun right now. So those changes should smooth out the early game slightly. The other major change is that we want to make the Panzer Grenadier tier a little bit more attractive, and also
Nice.
just all of the alternatives to the Jaegers basically a little bit more attractive.
Yeah.
So
I found that specific tier, it's kind of awkward because you don't have the proper anti-tank capability because the AT gun is absolutely terrible. And then your infantry doesn't hit that hard. You have artillery in the Stug, but it's hyper reactive. And the Wehrmacht is a very reactionary faction, which is cool. But I would like a little bit more impact and value out of that specific tech. I love the Wehrmacht style. It's becoming either my favorite or one of my favorite factions. It's going to be really nice to have a little buff with the Grenadier in the early game, and not need to just straight tech to Jaegers and spam those to survive. I don't like the style of just, and no one does. We all are tired of just spamming one unit and using that in all scenarios. It's a very bland and it doesn't have the tactical depth that Company of Heroes is known for.
So things like Panzer Grenadiers, the Stug, the AT gun is also getting the AT gun buffs. So all those units, the
Yeah.
Stummel as well for the 251. And then for the Jaegers are getting quite a significant power reduction because we've kind of underestimated how much power players could get out of that unit.
All Jaegers all the time.
Again,
Horrible.
that hand of Uno cards is
Yeah.
so funny. That aside, we're doing some quality improvements to for example, the 221 is cheaper now. So
Yeah.
So same thing, Marco. What do we want the Wehrmacht to look like, kind of moving forward, and maybe what do we want their early game to look like?
Yeah. So I feel like we definitely want Wehrmacht to be a little bit more flexible. They are the faction that can go, they can skip tiers if they want.
Right.
So they can decide to play a specific strategy. And before they were actually relying too much on Jaegers. So as Jason was saying, with the Jaeger nerf, we also didn't want players to just skip the building and just go straight the tier 3. So we are making the scout car a little bit more interesting. And that's actually what I'm personally looking forward to use. But we're making all the strategic all the strategic options, more viable. Even
Awesome.
the tier 4, we are buffing the tier 4. We are making Stostruppen the
Thank
elite
you.
troop that they should be.
Yes.
And also we are making the units that were not really played a lot, like the Broombar, a little bit more appealing. We have noticed, and this is like goes with every faction, that players rely a lot on medium tanks, a little bit too much probably. So we are making other options a little bit more interesting, especially when fighting against infantry.
Okay, that's actually interesting to me. So you're finding that they're not favoring like anti-infantry
Yeah.
heavy armor,
Yes.
like the Brumbar and like
they just
the
use
Dozer.
generalists.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting. Okay, so Africa Core, Jason, this note was yours. You basically said it's all or nothing, right? It's kind of feast or famine with the Africa Core. So can you maybe explain what you mean by that?
So yeah, so we tried a lot of things with the DAC. They are meant to be the most radical faction. And some of it's hit a little bit too well. Basically, their early game is really rough. But if they can get ahead, and particularly in the mid to the later parts of the game, they can just run away with the game super hard. With their armory upgrades and then vehicle spam, they can, like, if they get ahead of you, oh boy, good luck.
Yeah.
And so, we want heavy vehicle play to be a large part of the DAC strategy, but it's a little bit too much right now. So we want to, tone it back. So some of the later armory buffs are getting some nerfs. The way some of the upgrades work are also being rejigged to be a little bit less powerful. This way that, there's a little bit more incentive to round out your army rather than getting a good unit, upgrading it to be better, and then just spamming said unit.
Yeah.
That's still going to be a thing, but it should be a little bit less powerful now.
Right.
That's good.
So Marco, you like we were just saying, the Africa Core is either very vulnerable early, or they kind of steamroll the opposition. What do we kind of want the design philosophy to be behind, like how they should be playing?
So I think that especially with Africa Corps, I think the iterative approach is going to be crucial, because we are still figuring out exactly where they what's the good balance for them to feel where you can really commit to something and be either rewarded for that, or if you're punished, you're not punished too hard, and then you lose the game. And that's something that I think we will reach, maybe not immediately, but we are still improving things. Like even just the opening of the faction, what are your initial 3-4 units that you build? How quick you can build those. So we are changing that, for example, which is going to affect what are the most appealing units you want to build early game, for example, and that's going to affect also how you play your the rest of the game. Overall, what we want is to find a better balance, and I think we are already going to achieve that. A better balance between producing a new unit or building or getting an upgrade. We don't want players to just focus on massing vehicles, especially certain vehicles, or to get all the upgrades with just one vehicle, and that vehicle just feels like it takes over everything. So one of the changes, for example, is that when you get all your armory upgrades, you would still need one less shot for your vehicles to be killed instead of two. That's pretty massive, right?
So sorry, Jason, did I interrupt you?
No.
Okay. Do we have any final sort of thoughts on what we're doing with factions before we move on to our next section? Jason,
Yeah.
do you want to summarize things for us?
So one last thing is, again, I just want to reiterate, this is a continuous process.
Yeah.
We did talk about our goals and where we want to move these factions, and I hope they're aligned with a lot of what the community wants. Now, in terms of, are we going to achieve them in one patch? That not really. We're going to work really hard, and we're going to try and get towards that through every patch. And hopefully, as long as we're aligned on the right direction, every patch we will slowly get closer and closer to the goals that we want to hit. So we talked a lot about it, and you'll get to see the exact changes soon. But then hopefully people will understand that, hey, we can't solve a problem in one go.
Right. Like we said earlier, this is going to be an iterative process, and we kind of we don't want to swing the bat too hard one way, and then have to recorrect or kind of dial things back. So I imagine it's going to be like you said, a bit of an iterative process
Not
as we kind of.
underestimating
Yeah,
too much.
in general, we've been a little bit gentle on the changes we did. We don't want to just smash things and then create new problems.
Right.
So there is a possibility that we haven't quite mitigated some of the problems to the degree that some players want, but that means we'll handle it again.
Yeah.
And also, if we didn't mention a change or an issue with the faction in this talk or in this patch, that doesn't mean we don't see it or we're not talking about it.
Right,
We've already gone through a lot, and that's just this patch.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ground we want to cover.
Yeah. So before we get into our next section, I just wanted to address a couple of questions that I'm seeing in the Twitch chat. So just to reemphasize, this update is strictly going to be a balance update. We actually moved it forward because we were thinking about releasing it a little bit later, but we felt what, this is kind of important to get it out as soon as we can.
Good idea.
So
Very good idea.
We're really happy to be getting that out right
Thank
away.
you.
And in terms of like features and fixes and adjustments and new content, that's still to come, and we'll talk about that shortly. But let's kind of wrap up our last section here on the patch. Very, very quickly, I know with this update we don't make a ton of major changes to the existing battle groups, but Jason, what's kind of our focus with them right now?
So we rejigged some of the CP. Mostly, we just rejigged CP costs and the order of some of the abilities. For example, Luftwaffe Indian artillery.
Interesting.
Just to try and even out the playing field for battle groups a little bit more.
Right.
So hopefully, for example, USFF armored and the Wehrmacht mechanized should both feel quite a lot better to use. That their CP costs were a little too high, a little bit too slow.
I agree.
One note I will mention is that this will mean that text skipping and call-ins are still going to very much be very prevalent in the game. In some ways, we've increased that. Now we are aware that this is a little bit of a problem right now. It's a little too extreme, but we made the call to not quite address that in this patch. But this is very much something that's on our minds that we've been talking with the community with, and we'll work towards finding a better balance on this later. Down the line.
You kind of jumped to the third point there already, and I know like
Oh yeah, sorry.
it's always a spicy multiplayer question about call-ins and text skipping. I know there's a large segment of our audience that really loves those things, and there are some that are very adamant against them, and it's kind of this balance that we need to strike in terms of how we implement them. But I know they've also been a part of the franchise for since the start. I know our gameplay lead Matt has mentioned this on stream in the past that like we want call-ins to be a part of the franchise, right? But to your point, Jason, I know you're saying that like maybe they're being relied on too heavily. So how are we kind of keeping an eye on those things for the future?
Yeah. Like we are tracking how much they're being used. And also, it's a matter of how much do those strategies outweigh everything else. Again, our most important thing is to first hit diversity across different builds and strategies. So if that means we have a lot of different builds, as long as there's a lot of different builds, that's the first and most important goal. Then we're going to start looking at the proper balance between how much is your battle group really impacting you versus your core faction kind of thing. Right now, one thing I'll mention is that our battle groups are intended to be a very large part of your strategy.
Right.
Most of our best builds are all reliant on battle groups with their things, but sometimes it's a little cheesy, right? We've had run-ins with certain builds just kind of taking over the game with one or two abilities. We don't want that. Again, this will be something we'll be working for a very long time. I think this is going to be a long-term goal for this game.
Sorry, Marco, did you have a point there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that overall, we do believe that call-ins, we want to make call-ins still like options that every player can experience.
Right.
Yeah.
So even though we might have not reached the perfect balance yet with them, we still want that every player of every skill level can use them and have fun with them. So we will still probably try to smoothen the experience without before doing more radical changes to them, before considering more radical changes to them.
Gotcha.
Things like economic upgrades have been toned down or moved to a lower, a more late game tier. And we are also trying to smoothen some of the very, very early game calling units that right now are being perceived as too strong or too oppressing to the enemy, to your opponents.
Right.
So we are making them a little bit less viable and a
Okay.
little bit more balanced.
Good to know. So let's talk about off maps and planes, because again, I know this is also a spicy conversation. Marco, do you want maybe want to address like what are some of our goals are there? I know we have some work that's maybe not dropping in this update, but is planned for the future. So can maybe you address that?
Yeah. So in general, at a high level, we do recognize that both off-map and planes are not hitting the mark in terms of consistency and reliability. Even from a visual standpoint, they're not like quite as punchy and as smooth as they should be, right?
Definitely not.
They're plain flight plans.
So many.
And they're hard to predict and they're also hard to counter. So what we are focusing on is like bigger, more systemic approach to the problem. So this is not something that I can tell you when it's coming. I cannot talk about that right now, but it's more of a systemic thing that we are doing, where we're really trying to think at how do we solve the whole problem? How do we make the whole experience with planes and off-map better?
It's not
in
easy
that
to do,
regards,
but
we're asking ourselves, how do we make planes look better and be more reliable and off-map more reliable, so when the player uses the ability, he can expect a certain outcome in a certain amount of time. And then also for the opposing players, like more ways to read what's happening and to react to that. So we always want this sort of like play and counterplay, where you don't just press a button and then the enemy is done. But you can always find a way to react to that. And like find a way to get away of the abilities.
Jason, did you have anything you want to talk about with off maps?
No, Marco's put it perfectly. But like the one thing I'll just mention again is like this patch in particular doesn't really dive into off maps and planes. But we're transitioning a little bit, talking about what we want to do in the future. But yeah, like off maps and planes very much on the docket. Like, you know, planes slightly away from planes, but just off maps in general. We know a lot of them are either a little like crazy and way too good. Some of them are like, you know, a little bit hard to use, right? Or just not worth using. So we're going to work towards that in the future.
Okay. Jason, did we cover off faction upgrades, or did you have more that you want to talk about there?
So in general terms, like one of the big additions that Co3 added compared to like the prior titles, well, Co1 actually had a bit of this, is a lot of heavy faction upgrades. So the support centers for the Americans, the veterancy for the Germans, the training center, for example. And in general, we haven't quite hit the mark that we wanted to aim for these. Kind of the goals with these were to allow players to customize their builds as they were playing the game, and or to go for some really cool mutations on what your army normally could have done. But some of the time, either these are just way too impactful and taking over a game, or some of them are just not worth getting, period. And to kind of move them into the more situational or like you want to get them, but they won't break the game kind of thing. That'll be an ongoing process, but we are aware that it's not quite where it needs to be.
I would actually add that one of the goals that we want to have is that we want players to use faction upgrades and even tech skipping, not just as an option of their plan before actually playing the game. Like we don't want players to already come up with a plan. We want them to be able to use the upgrades we offer to adapt to certain situations and balance them out in a good way. And I'll bring this as like my experience with Co1 has been a lot like that, where you start with something in mind, but then you adapt along the way based on what your enemy throws at you and what you feel like is best to use. So I think that's a goal that we want to achieve maybe. And it's an ongoing process, of course.
Of course, yes. Fun question I just saw in chat, and I know I've seen this one a bunch, but British tank destroyer when? Without giving anything away, I know there are some concerns about the fact that, like, you know, is the 17 pounder sort of good enough compared to some of the other options that the other factions have? I have seen the 17 pounder do some like pretty wild stuff and like win games, but I'm kind of curious, Jason, what your thoughts are on maybe like late game tank destroyers and late game armor.
That ability though.
You know, we've tried, and we're going to continue to try to get these Toad AT into the right place. We know they're not quite where they need to be. You know, corporate speak aside, like, you know, towing them is a struggle, right? Like, it's a struggle to get it to the right place. And that's something, you know, we're very aware of, and we want to fix this.
Okay.
And in terms of just tank destroyers in general, one of the approaches in this game, people probably notice, is we don't quite have as long of a range overall. We don't have the 70 range Jackson anymore, like that or the absolute tank destroyers. And did I say 70? I think it's 60. But basically, we don't have screen wide vehicle to vehicle combat. Because we want players to get up close to each other, use abilities, start brawling each other, take advantage of people's side armor, et cetera, and you know we want more of that. So tank destroyers in general just aren't much of a thing. I know people look at the Hellcat, it's like, what is this? But there's a lot to that, and hopefully, you know.
Interesting.
This is more of a design question, and I'll throw it to you, Marco. A really fun one I just saw in the chat was about. Is there a way to put a more of an emphasis on defensive options like barbed wire, anti-tank traps, sandbags? I know we see a little bit of that, you know, especially in like more competitive games. But what do we want to see there? Because again, it is something that kind of differentiates Company of Heroes from a lot of other strategy games. Is that ability for your units to build those strong defensive things?
So actually, we do have one small update on the barbed wire because we noticed that players were actually very smart in placing sandbags to protect themselves, and then barbed wire in front of them to prevent the enemy from using the cover. But the way barbed wire was balanced, it was very easy during combat that it actually got destroyed by small arms. So now we are making it much tougher, so that it's not as easy as it was before to destroy it and then use the enemy cover. Long-term goal, yes, absolutely. Like I wouldn't even say long. Let's say it's on our radar, and to make those defenses much smoother. I think the approach we had with the way you build them resembles a lot more Co-1, where you can build your minuscule portions of defenses rather than the big long chunk of cover. So we definitely want to take a step back and reassess the system and understand how we can make it better. And that goes for both those defenses, especially when we want to smoothen the experience of placing them, and also all the defensive structures like bunkers. We want to make them smooth and balanced as an experience. At the start of the game, I think we can all agree that they were a little bit too strong, especially the German bunkers. And then we toned them down. I think there is room to improve them, and I hope we can share more news about how we want to improve them.
Okay, good to know. So before we kind of wrap up our patch chat, are there any final thoughts on that? Like Jason, do you have any sort of final thoughts on what we want to accomplish with this update and what we're like looking forward to in the future?
Yeah, we're excited to present what we have. Hopefully, this is a meaningful improvement in a lot of ways. But I completely understand that a lot of players probably want more. Please stick with us because, we're gonna work hard towards getting all of these, hitting all of these goals.
Absolutely.
And one of the things is, again, I just wanted to mention this is an iterative process, and it's not like it's very difficult to go in a straight line from where we are now to hitting the all of the points that we want to do.
Yep.
And I know we've mentioned a lot in this chat. But we are very passionate, right? Both Marco and I, we've played a lot of Co. So we really want to do this, and we are working hard to do it.
What about you, Marco? Final sort of thoughts on this update and what we want to get done here.
I think it's a good step in the right direction. Honestly, as a player, I'm very glad that we're doing this, and I think it's the right approach. And I'm pretty sure that our community would see that we've put a lot of effort into trying to smoothen the experience for every faction.
Yeah.
So it's not like one faction is super nerfed and the other one is super buffed.
Marco said he didn't play. He hasn't been playing.
I also would like to thank the community for their patience.
Yeah.
And also let them know that even though we may not be super reactive when we reply or with replies and talking to them in forums, we do read. We do read. We take good care of that. We are really interested in their opinion, and we're really working hard to make this game better. So it's
Absolutely.
even like we are always every day working hard to make the game better.
Yeah, and like we mentioned at the top, like we're gonna be hoping to have a more regular cadence of communication now that things have kind of hit a steady flow or a steady rhythm after release.
Yeah.
Things are a little bit less hectic, and we're now kind of in this the game's out there, it's live, and we're gonna keep working on it every day. So before we wrap up, folks, I did tease this earlier, and we also wanted to take a couple minutes to show off our updated development priorities list. So we're going to be, let me just switch here so you can take a look at it while I chat about it. So there it
nice.
is.
Okay.
We're going to
changed
be
here? We
releasing
saw
some
this
more
already.
information next week on why this list looks the way that it does, along with what got checked off our last list and how certain items may have shifted around. But for now, we hope this gives you a sense of what we're going to be working on now and what comes next for Company of Heroes 3. We do know there are some big ticket items that players have been asking about that aren't on this list, but we're working hard to get them mapped out and to determine when we can make them happen and to provide more details on them as soon as we can. So I'll leave that up for a couple more seconds as I do our quick wrap up. Again, if you
All right, guys. So let's see here. What has changed? I remember the last roadmap balance update. Okay, that's on target. So hopefully they start releasing more balance updates in a more timely manner. It was like they said. I mean, it's been a slow start, very slow start to updating the game, but it looks like the patch notes or the patches and the updates will start rolling out much quicker, and that will just really help move the game along in a positive manner. New 3v3 map. This can't come soon enough, and I'm really bummed that we can't get a 3v3 and a 4v4 map like very soon, next patch. We desperately need more large team game maps, and I don't like that this is stuck in development still. Like, we should just be getting maps out and testing them and playing. Get that variety going, because it's so stale playing on just a couple maps all the time. But the maps are good. They're good quality, and I just can't. This is like number one for me, is getting more maps into the game. Multiplayer quality of life. Okay, we already knew that. They've mentioned this before. Player names and additional team color changes. I don't know what. Okay, player names, fantastic. Additional team color changes. So it looks like you'll be able to not only pick new colors, but you'll be able to change your colors. So that's pretty cool. I actually like that. I don't know if you're going to be able to do that in ranked mode. I don't know how that would work. But very curious what this means. Audio improvements, they mentioned that before. That's very much anticipated. Oh, look at this. Camera zoom distance changes. This coming next patch, hopefully, is absolutely awesome. I can't wait to see what this has in store, especially if you can be moving in and out of zooms like in-game. I think that is a really cool change. It's going to really help multitasking in a lot of ways. So I can't wait to hear more about number 5 here. In development, new 4v4 map can't come soon enough. Campaign stuff, very cool. Invite flow and party invitation improvements. Yeah, the UI needs a lot of work. UI, UX. Another 3v3 map. Okay. That's good, actually. Hopefully these roll out like at the same time. Start getting more maps into the pool. Next balance update. So yeah, once again, look, within a couple months, you're going to have 2 major patches at least for balance. Expansion 1, player profile. Okay, player rank display improvement. So more UI stuff, more integration with the ranking system and everything in the game menu. Hopefully the game menu gets improved over time as well. But guys, that's going to wrap it up for the developer stream. And let's jump into the patch notes. All right, so here are the patch notes. Let's take it from the top. We're excited to release our first major balance update. In this update, our team has focused on several key areas to tone down oppressive strategies and increase unit and strategic diversity. We will continue to monitor unit and faction performance for future updates. In this update, you can expect general adjustment to balance for all factions, balance pass over battle groups, addressing the power of forward reinforcement, significant changes and boost to heavy machine guns and anti-tank gun teams. All right, so what I want to say about this real quick, based on the stream that we just watched, after listening to Marco and Jason, what I love about their approach to balance is that they're incorporating not just game balance, but improving strategic and tactical complexity in the game. Making sure that there's a lot of strategic depth and diversity is really important, because that's going to be what really makes this an amazing strategy game. Not simply balance, but complexity and depth, and that real tactical feel when you play. And I think they have the right perspective. I think they're moving in the right direction. And to be honest, I'm really encouraged by that stream that we had. I thought their communication was good, and I think they're moving in the right direction. So okay, let's continue on. General gameplay changes. Anti-tank rifles. So the Africa Corps and the British Corps infantry sections, boys AT rifles. Of course, those are the two primary. Anti-tank rifles are overperforming in their ability to shut down vehicle play and engage targets while under suppression. The following changes address these cases and allow vehicles to kite anti-tank rifle units. Range decrease from 40 to 35. Weapon cooldown modifier when suppressed increased by 50%. Okay, so this is super important. And I'm so happy that this is like the first change too. I think it's here for a reason. This has been one of the most oppressive and common strategies we've seen. I'm sure everyone is just super sick of this by this time. But range decreased from 40 to 35 on the anti-tank rifles. So let's think about infantry sections with AT rifles. The fact that they why are they nerfing them with range instead of damage or any other modifier? It's because if you decrease their range, you're going to allow enemy vehicles and units to kite them more easily, and that will allow better players to be able to stay out of range of the AT rifles and pick off those infantry section units. So this is a better change because it's not removing AT rifles from the game completely. What it's doing is decreasing their range so that their purpose in the game is not all encompassing, right? They can't be used to engage a Panzer IV if the player with the Panzer IV is staying out of range, because the Panzer IV has longer range, right? So it should be able to beat the boy's AT rifle, right? Whereas before, this thing was picking off enemy infantry and enemy tanks because the range was long enough at 40 to be able to deal with both. I mean, this thing was sometimes able to pick off even snipers, which was ridiculous. You know, you don't that feels terrible when this thing is just all encompassing, multi-purpose. That shouldn't be the case. So I love the fact that kiting is going to be very good against these AT rifles. Auto reverse distance is being increased to reduce how often a player needs to use the reversibility and make it easier to back vehicles up during the heat of battle. Okay, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. The distance a player can now right-click to issue an automatic auto-reverse command without using the auto-reversibility has been set from 20 to 60. Wow. Okay, I think this is a good change. I have to try this out in game, but the fact that you don't have to like overly micromanage your reversing, the fact that you can now click behind the vehicle farther away, right, on the map, is just going to be more intuitive, I feel. It's going to make for less mistakes. It's going to be easier to execute. I think this is a good change overall. I like it. Barbed wire armor increased from 1 to 10. Okay, so the barbed wire armor increase was needed because the barbed wire was being destroyed way too much by small arms fire and early game combat. So I think this is good. It's going to make them more resilient, and you're going to need, you know, vehicles or later game units to take these out more effectively. So I think it's a good change, increasing the defensive play as they talked about in the stream. Bunkers. So this is for the Wehrmacht and the Africa Corps heavy machine gun bunker. Build time standardized at 20 seconds. I think it's a good change, just so like it's intuitive. Players know bunkers for the Axis in Co 3 cost 20 seconds, or rather, their build time is 20 seconds. So it's easier to track that way. Makes sense. Button abilities. The Wehrmacht flak AA gun, U.S. forces, okay, motor carriage, and the M1919. Button has been overhauled to be less punishing. Button vehicles can now fight back and will no longer be immobilized, allowing them to maneuver or retreat. Yeah, I think this is a good change because this can become extremely abusive if a vehicle is buttoned and has no counterplay or counter response. If the result of a unit of a vehicle being buttoned is just death, I think that's a problem. So the fact that they can at least shoot back and still deal damage, it makes sense. Like especially against the flat gun. I think this flat gun was super strong buttoning vehicles with the impact that it deals, the damage and the range. I think it was just a little too abusive. So I think that's a really good change overall. Forward reinforcement times. We have adjusted forward reinforcement to lessen the power of frontline reinforcement, especially during combat. This should dramatically lower the efficiency of forward reinforcing, making it less oppressive in larger games. Okay, so reinforcement time of in-combat units located plus 45 away from the HQ increased by plus 100% for a total of 200%. Wow. Reinforcement times of units located plus 45 away from the HQ increased by plus 100%. Okay, so I like this change a lot because, of course, you shouldn't be able to reinforce units on the front line and be able to deal maximum damage and maintain map control. It's too effective. It's too cheap. There should be a cost for reinforcing on the front line. There should be a cost somewhere, and you're investing in these forward reinforcing vehicles, but you don't want these blobs just moving around being followed by these medic trucks and being reinforced. I don't think it makes for good gameplay, for dynamic tactical gameplay. It just makes for abusive blobs focus firing and reinforcing constantly. So I like the fact that there's a cost to it. It kind of allows front lines to stabilize more and overall make for just a better tempo and pace of the game. Mobile anti-tank guns. Anti-tank guns are seeing improvements across the board, increasing their reliability and performance against vehicles. Additionally, we have implemented key adjustments to minimize the frequency of shells striking the terrain, ensuring a more consistent performance at long ranges. Yeah, I think mobile AT guns needed major work, so that's good to see. So it's going to hit objects and terrain significantly less. Thank God. This happens so often. It was crazy. Horizontal traverse speed increased from 16 to 24. Nice. Aim time decreased from 0.5 to 0.125. Build time standardized to 40 seconds. Okay. Reinforcement time standardized to 5 seconds. Nice. Accuracy at long range increased by 7%. That's fantastic because I do remember at long range this thing missing like 90% of the time, which is nuts. All right. Mobile heavy machine guns. Heavy machine guns are seeing improvements across the board to address their unreliability in their anti-infantry or anti-blob role. 100% factual. Cost standardized to 240 manpower. All right. Crew health increased from 80 to 90. So that's just going to make them more resilient. It's not 10 HP is not a major change, but at least it's some resilience. But actually, that's pretty substantial when you consider the whole squad. Okay, horizontal traverse speed increased from 35 to 50. Yeah, this was one of the biggest things for me. This horizontal traverse speed, the way that the gun turned from unit to unit was so slow that you were almost guaranteed to be flanked as a player trying to micro your MG. You couldn't micro it quick enough to hit a couple of units, which I think is an issue. I like this speed increase. Infantry now become pinned around 70% faster. Good, I like that, because oftentimes enemy blobs were still able to take several shots, even though the MG had been firing for a couple seconds. So I think that's 100% needed. A player should be punished for running into an MG. Reinforcement time standardized to 5 seconds. Okay. Suppression radius increased from 13 to 15. Good. I think that's good. Suppression recovery now takes 3 seconds longer. Yeah. Okay. So this is what I was talking about earlier. I think this is so important because before they were units after being suppressed were able to get up immediately and start moving right when the MG stopped firing. And it was just like, come on, give me a break. Like there should be a build-up time of them getting back up and maneuvering again. Okay, smoke. Reducing smoke duration serves two purposes. Reducing stall times for units contesting capture points while hiding into smoke and decreasing smoke effectiveness when countering heavy machine guns. Smoke duration decreased from 30 to 20 seconds. Okay, yeah, I think this is a great thing for both capturing points and as utility against MGs. One of the reasons why MGs are not effective, it's not just because of all these things you see here, these issues that they were having in terms of their effectiveness, right? This, of course, is going to help, but MGs and Co-3 have to deal with a lot of utility. Enemy artillery, light vehicles very quickly, smoke, right, and grenade packages on several units. This is unprecedented in the franchise. So because there's so much utility in the game, static weapons like machine guns are not as effective just naturally because enemy units have so many ways and tools to deal with them. So I like the fact that they're not necessarily removing the utility, but they're making it weaker. All right, snipers. We are reducing the effectiveness of snipers when operating independently. Oh no. Oh no. They will now require spotters to utilize their full range, except there's not a spotter unit, and are more vulnerable to incoming fire. I feel like they were already pretty weak. You know, I'm someone who loves to play with snipers, and I feel like they die extremely quickly in this game. Furthermore, these units will now fire marginally slower. I don't mind that necessarily. All right, let's look at the changes. Aim time standardized to 1.75 seconds. Target size increased from 1.33 to 1.5. This is potentially problematic. It's making the unit bigger, so it's easier to hit. Vision range decreased from 45 to 35. That's huge. Huge nerf. Weapon cooldown increased from 3.5. Okay, yeah, so this is a pretty substantial nerf to snipers. I'm going to have to see how they work. Obviously, a very intensive and high micro unit. Costly. It takes time for them to recoup their initial cost. So I feel like that's a little heavy-handed on the sniper, but time will tell. All right, let's jump into faction changes. U.S. forces. Now, the U.S. forces continue to struggle in team game modes, where many of their advantages are less pronounced. Our focus for this patch has been to improve their mid-game options, reduce the price of certain upgrades, and strengthen their light vehicle play. Okay, so that makes sense. I felt like in 1v1 and 2v2, they're relatively strong, at least in the mid-game. Of course, the late game is where they drop off, but it's interesting that they're balancing based on team games. I was not expecting that. And it looks like from a design standpoint, they want light vehicles in particular to play a bigger role. Okay, so the 4x4 truck, 30 cal machine gun lethality increased by 13%. That's pretty damn good. Self-repair increase from 8 to self-repair speed increase from 8 to 12. Okay, that's a pretty substantial increase there. Self-repair duration increased from 10 to 15. Wow. Okay, veteran ability capture and decapture speed increased from 100% to 100%. So yeah, so this is going to be, I already thought this was pretty effective, but it's going to be even more effective now. Got a 50% increase in self-repair speed. That's a lot. And I think that's pretty damn good. It's going to keep this thing mobile and dynamic on the front line. Advanced logistics, manpower reduced from 250 to 200. That's substantial. I like that. This is going to be really strong. Assault engineers, reinforcement cost decreased from 25 to 23. That's minimally impactful, I guess. It's a little buff. Bazooka team, the destroy obstacle ability damage penalty against infantry is increased from 25% to 75%. All right, so I think that was needed, 100%. So basically, yeah, these were a little too abusive in terms of destroying obstacles. The white phosphorus rocket ability increased from 25 to 35 munitions. All right, these were pretty damn good. I think they do deserve to be balanced accordingly. Engineer, okay, so we got reinforcement cost decreased, grenade package, fuel cost decreased. So they're just giving more utility and options, like they mentioned, available to the riflemen. Research time decreased from 30 to 25 seconds. So once again, making the riflemen more universal, giving them more utility. High velocity armor piercing rounds for the Sherman and the Hellcat. Can no longer pierce through shot blocking obstacles. HVAP rounds can now use the reload times of the parent vehicle's main weapon. This is general reload time decrease of 1 second, resulting in increased rate of fire. Okay, so pretty good. Although I really don't build Hellcats very much. I don't really. They don't seem like I don't see the reason to have a Hellcat over a Sherman personally. You guys can let me know if I'm wrong about that, but I just feel like the Sherman has so much more utility and resilience overall. Motor carriage. We've adjusted the M3 75mm gun motor carriage to be geared to destroying lighter vehicles and providing fire support against units like dug-in infantry and heavy machine gun teams. Yeah, I like this. This is something that hasn't gotten enough love, but let's look at the changes. Aim time decreased from 1 to 0.125. Aim time decreased. Barrage range decreased from 60 to 50. Barrage recharge decreased from 70 to 45 seconds. Penetration decreased from 300 to 200. Reload time decreased from 4 to 3.75 seconds. Oh wow, 4 to 4.5 seconds to 3.75. That's pretty good. Rotation rate increased from 30 to 50. Okay, man, I feel like US is getting a lot of buffs overall. M3 half track conversion to M3 75mm gun motor carriage decreased from 75 to 60 munitions. Manpower cost decreased from 270 to 250. Non-converted form now gains shared veterancy. Dang, that's good. That's pretty good. So once again, giving the M3 more versatility. M4 Sherman Dozer, nobody cares about this tank. Manpower cost decreased from 420 to 400. Wonderful economic balance change here, but once again, who is building the Dozer? Does anyone build the Dozer? Let me know in the comments. I never build this thing, but maybe I'm missing something. All right, M8 Greyhound. These changes are intended to increase the Greyhound's performance against infantry in open terrain. Yeah, I thought this needed a change. 30 cal machine gun lethality increased by 10% at all ranges. 50 cal machine gun lethality increased by 20% at all ranges. Speed increased from 6.4 to 6.75. So that's great to see. I think the M8 Greyhound should get more love in this next meta. M8 Scott. Barrage minimum range decreased from 15 to 10. Well, that's pretty substantial. Cost decreased from 320 manpower and 60 fuel to 280 manpower and 50 fuel. That's pretty big. High explosive barrage reload time decreased from 3 to 2. Horizontal weapon traverse speed increased from 30 to 45. Oh, wow. Reload time decreased from 4.5 to 3.5 or 4. Vertical weapon traverse speed increased from 10 to 15. Okay, so the M16 multiple gun motor carriage. Armor decreased. Okay, so the armor is decreased. I don't know how that's going to affect it because this thing is obviously going to be at range. Can now use the prioritized vehicle's ability. Damage against aircraft decreased. Weapon penetration decreased. Okay. I haven't built this too much, but that's interesting. M24 Chaffee light tank. I love this tank. I use this a lot in the tech test. This thing was dominant in the tech test, and then it kind of lost some of its stardom and wasn't being used as much as I thought. These changes will make the unit more effective at hunting down other light vehicles, give it better maneuverability to flank heavier vehicles, and disengaging from enemy. Oh man, this thing is going to be beastly. I thought that the M24 light tank, the Chaffee, I thought this thing missed its shots a ton. It was like constantly missing shots in my experience, but let's look at the changes. Acceleration from 2.5 to 3.5. Deceleration from 3.5 to 5.5. Manpower cost reduced from 320 to 300. Now has medium vehicle pathing and medium crush. Wow, that's going to be so strong. The fact that this thing is going to be moving like a smaller tank is going to make it so effective. Rotation rate from 35 to 40. Reload time decreased from 3.8 to 3.5. Speed from 5.5 to 6.5. This thing is going to be an absolute beast. Super mobile in the mid game. And again, it hits pretty hard as well. Okay, M1918 Browning automatic rifles. Research time decreased from 45 to 30 seconds. That's pretty big. Once again, making the utility and versatility of American infantry very strong. M19 heavy machine gun team, once again, build decrease from 45 to 30. Okay, rifleman poured on him has received a heavy adjustment to its suppression. Previously, it allowed riflemen to win all infantry engagements through suppression while also receiving a damage boost. Browning automatic rifles have also had their accuracy slightly increased to improve their effectiveness at ranged. Okay, so yeah, poured on him was very abusive. It was basically a ability you could use to close out a game or close out an engagement. Yeah, allowed them to win all infantry engagements through suppression. Yeah, it was just a win more button basically. Browning automatic rifle long range lethality increased by 15%. Browning rifle mid range lethality increased by 5%. Poured on him ability. Area suppression removed. Yeah, that's such a good change. Recharge time from 120 to 180. Okay, weapon suppression adjusted. Changes are a general decrease, so just an overall nerf. Browning rifle suppression decreased. Garand rifle suppression increased. Thompson MG suppression decreased. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, survival training. Fuel cost decreased from 80 to 50. That's pretty big. Health increase now applies to team weapon crews. So once again, making these upgrades more effective universally. M4A3E8 Sherman. To differentiate the EZ8 from the regular 76 Sherman, the high velocity armor piercing round ability now comes as default, while also retaining the regular Sherman vantage abilities, giving the tank excellent flexibility and options. High velocity armor piercing round is now a default ability. Veterancy abilities change to match the standard M4A1 Sherman, high explosive rounds and white phosphorus rounds. Okay, yeah, so just giving the M4 just more, once again, utility, more impact against enemy armor. Sherman Whizbang, cost reduced from 400 manpower and 100 fuel to 380 manpower and 80 fuel. I like this change. Not a major change, but I feel like and with the American playstyle and the fact that you need to be pumping out several tanks, it could be a little taxing to be paying 100 fuel for a Whizbang, especially because these have to be relatively close to the front line too. Population cost decreased from 14 to 13. All right, battle groups. Rapid production. So for armored battle group, rapid production command point cost decreased from 1 to 0. Seek and destroy command point increased from 2 to 3. Strength and steel command point cost decreased from 2 to 1. Wow, so rapid production to 0 is super good. Seek and destroy to 3. I thought it was 2 before, but maybe not. Okay, so interesting. I think we should have more reasons to be going for armored, instead of airborne constantly. Field repairs has been reworked to be easier to use and have a greater impact. Ability duration increased from 30 to 45 seconds. Health restored per second increased from 11 to 20. Wow, really good. Munition cost decreased from 125 to 100. Well, now activate vehicle is on the move. Whoa, that is insane. The fact that you could be if I'm reading this right, you can repair on the move. That's so ridiculous. That's so good. Okay, M4A3 Sherman Combat Group. The cost of the combat group has been significantly reduced to better reflect the capabilities of the Sherman EZ8, its timing, and its position in the battle group. Okay, cost decreased from 800 manpower and 120 fuel to 640 manpower and 100 fuel. That's a pretty good buff. Command point cost decreased from 8 to 7 as well. The Sherman EZ8 will now enter the field carrying a veteran level 1 assault engineer squad instead of the standard rifle. Damn, I think that's really strong. This thing is going to get out in the battlefield probably a couple minutes earlier, and it's going to be cheaper, and you're getting a better squad technically. I mean, you're getting a squad that's going to be able to have more utility on the front line with your armor. So I think looks really strong. Okay, Special Operations Battle Group, only one change. Sherman Whizbang command points decreased from 6 to 5. Fair. I think that's good. Okay, so Wehrmacht. Love the Wehrmacht. And I also love the U.S. forces, but I feel like the U.S. forces got way buffed in this patch. Okay, the Wehrmacht is receiving boosts to its early game with its improvement focused on the Panzer Grenadier Company to increase build and composition diversity. We're also addressing the dominance of Jaegers across all game modes. I like that they're balancing for all game modes. Okay, although 1v1 is the most important. Okay, so 251 medium carrier. Conversion to stumble cost decreased from 90 to 60 munitions. Non-converted form now gains shared veterancy. Mines now probably camouflage and trigger. Okay. Mine damage increased from 300 to 500. That's really good. Mine deployment time from 11.5 seconds to 7.5 seconds. That's super good. So 251. I look forward to using this. I love the 251 medium carrier. I can't wait to be using the Panzer Grenadier Company more. I'm going to be doing this quite a bit. It's personally my favorite company for the Wehrmacht tech. Okay, Armored Car 221. Cost decrease from 280 and 30 fuel to 220 and 25 fuel. Nice. So you're going to see more armored cars, hopefully. Mid-range accuracy increased by 18%. Far-range accuracy increased by 43%. Speed increased from 6 to 7.5. Whoa. That is way faster. This thing was really weak before. For the cost, it did not give you the value you were expecting. So this is great to see overall. Fallschirmjäger's FG42 ready aim time from 0.125 to 0.5. So they're nerfing Fallschirmjägers. I don't know why necessarily. Were these overpowered? I guess when you had like 3 of them, they become very abusive, but you shouldn't be building 3 of them anyways. I don't know. I never saw this as an issue. Pioneers, costs increased from 28 to 30. That's a small change. I never saw these as a major issue personally. Maybe just because you could call them in on the front line immediately, they should cost a little bit more to reinforce. Okay. Flak 30, 20 millimeter anti-air gun. Build time increased from 50 to 45 seconds. Okay. Grenadiers. Here's a big one. Let's see what they got here. Grenadiers have received several adjustments to slightly improve their performance, so they're in line with other early game infantry. Assault package costs from 45 to 50 munitions. Okay. Assault package sprint ability munition cost removed. Okay, wow. Assault package sprint ability is removed. Okay. Sprint recharge time increased from 35 to 180. Holy smokes. That's a huge buff. So these things are going to be able to sprint all around the map, hunt down enemy units, flank extremely well, cap extremely quickly. I like this a lot. Manpower cost decreased from 270 to 260. Minor change, but this is good. Just so it's cheaper than the other main lines. Medical kit healing duration increased from 15 to 30 seconds. Okay, really good. Medical kit healing rate per second reduced from 8 to 6. Veterancy level 2 accuracy bonus multiplier increased from 10 to 15%. Veterancy requirements decreased essentially from 900, 2700 to 800, 2400. So overall, Grenadiers getting a lot more utility and scalability in the game. I like this a lot. I think it's really good. It's a good change, not to just inherently change the unit. The Grenadier shouldn't be inherently changed. It's still serving the overall design theme that Relic chose, but at least now it has more utility. And I do like the sprinting and medical kit capabilities a lot. All right, hold down ability. This ability now has delayed activation to prevent immediate defensive boosts. The hold down bonuses are activated 10 seconds after the ability is triggered. An indicator was added to represent the countdown before the bonus triggers. I like this ability a lot because there should be a cost and time to hold down your vehicle so that it's in a defensive posture and defensive position with defensive bonuses. You shouldn't be able to toggle back and forth between hold down and regular mode just so you can win a fight on the front line. You know, it just feels very gimmicky in my opinion. So I like the fact that you now have to wait and you have to strategically choose when you're going to hold down. Make sure you're not on the brink of losing your unit, right? And it's going to allow the opposing player to avoid or counteract your play because there's not only an indicator, but there's also a time required for the ability to trigger. So overall, fantastic change. I thought it was really gimmicky before. Jaeger light infantry. The Jaeger's high flexibility, powerful base stats, and superior anti-tank capabilities have made them dominant in all modes. We are shaving off a significant amount of power from the upgraded Jaeger and Panzer Jaegers, emphasizing trade-offs when opting out of the reconnaissance package. Capture and decapture rate decreased. Okay, smoke grenade range decreased from 45 to 35. Sight reduced from 40 to 35. These are huge changes. Reconnaissance package now increases vision by 7 and capture and decapture rate back to 150. Okay, so overall, you're not going to want to just spam out Jaegers and use that as your main infantry for the rest of the game. These have a more focused now, like a more focused purpose and utility. And of course, they're going to be very effective as a supportive unit. But I mean, we'll see. But I don't think you're going to be wanting to just use this as your main line because their sight's reduced. You know, their capture time on points is reduced, so they're not going to be as effective early on, needing to cap and decap points. So I'm very curious to see how this is going to affect them. But I'm all for this unit not being your standard mainline unit. I think it's a little silly, but we'll see. Panzer Shrek, accuracy increased, or accuracy against infantry decreased by 50%. Area of effect damage removed. Long range aim time multiplier increased from 50 to 100%. Ready aim time increased from 1 to 1.25. Scatter increase. Rockets should no longer reliably scatter into vehicles at longer ranges. Okay, so I like this overall. I think this is good. Martyr 3, tank destroyer, longer range, accuracy increased by 20%. Fantastic. These things did miss a lot. These things are so effective, though. I think they're going to be so good. One of my favorite vehicles in the game. MG42 heavy machine gun team build time decreased from 26. 1 second, guys. 1 second. Fantastic. Thank you, Relic. We needed this desperately. Officer quarters upgrades. Okay. Research time decreased from 45 to 30 seconds. That's pretty big. That's huge. Panzer IV command tank acceleration increased from 1.9 to 2.5. Deceleration increased from 3 to 4. Speed increased from 5 to 4. Okay, so that's nice. I think a command tank should have a little bit more mobility, maneuverability, especially for its purpose, right? It's supposed to be buffing. So the buffing goes hand in hand with the speed and acceleration, just so it can be maneuvering around your units better overall. Okay, Panzer Grenadier Squad manpower cost decreased from 360 to 340. Okay, Stug 3 assault gun. Okay, this will be interesting. We have made major changes to the Stug 3 to make the vehicle more attractive in larger and later games where it was unreliable at fighting enemy armor. Okay, did this need a buff? Let's find out. Acceleration increased from 1.9 to 2.7 essentially, 2.67. Cost adjusted from 360 manpower and 50 fuel to 300 manpower and 60 fuel. Okay. Deceleration increased from 3 to 4. Long range accuracy increased. Rotation rate increased from 30 to 40. Reload time decreased. Weapon penetration increased. Rotation rate increased from 30 to 40. So it's faster at turning now. I like this tank a lot. I'm all for it. The reason why I love this tank is that you can pump these out in the mid game as a reaction to heavy enemy armor if you want. So you have a couple of options with this tank. It's something you could rely on until you tech and get out your later tanks, right? And it's also something later on that you can use as a reactionary play, where you're using these as sort of anti-tank, cheap anti-tank options. But this seems pretty strong, like a pretty strong buff overall. Straustruppen have received a number of improvements to make them the premier anti-infantry squad for their cost and timing. Okay, this is really good because, like we said earlier, this did not feel like a late game infantry, you know? Like my Jaegers were serving a better purpose than these Straustruppen. So I like the fact that this is going to feel like an elite infantry. It should be an elite infantry. You're paying for it, and it's in the late game. Armor increased from 1 to 1.25. Overall damage per second output increased by 13%. G43 accuracy increased. Okay, G43 now properly reloads after 10 rounds fired, not 9. Okay, LMG accuracy from 46 to 45, 40. Okay, I don't know what any of this means necessarily. LMG will no longer spread damage on the targeted squads, but instead focus down individual entities. Oh, fantastic. So more lethality, which is really good for these elite infantry. Reinforcement costs increase from 39 to 40. Okay, I like that. I'm really curious to be, using that unit more often. Stuck 3, the assault gun acceleration increase from 1.9 to 2.67. Deceleration increase from 3 to 4. Rotation rate increase from 30 to 40. Stummel half track. The Stummel has been adjusted to make it a more effective fire support unit against infantry through increased range and area effect damage. Auto fire range increased from 40 to 45. Auto fire minimum range removed. Area of effect radius from 5 to 6. Area effect damage increased from 33. Okay, you guys can look at the percentage numbers. I'm not going to read through those. Penetration for barrage and auto fire standardized to 20. Oh, the Brumbar. Yeah, guys, I haven't actually used this very much, so I'm really curious to see how this fares. Start using it a little bit more, but this should be. I mean, it looks pretty. This looks like a pretty substantial buff. Stern Panzer Brumbar build time decreased from 50 to 45. Nice. Cost decreased from 440 manpower, 120 fuel to 440 manpower, 110 fuel. Okay, small buff. Rotation rate increased from 25 to 28. Reload time decreased from 8 to... Oh, that's pretty big. That's pretty big. Speed increased from 4 to 4.25. I think this thing needs more love. Okay, the self-propelled gun. Barrage recharge time reduced from 60 to 45. Creeping barrage recharge time reduced from 180 to 70 seconds. I actually haven't used this yet, so I have no idea how impactful this is. It's a very cool unit, I will say. It's a very cool unit. I just haven't used it much at all. Okay, Wehrmacht battle groups. Panzer IV command tank. Command point cost reduced from 4 to 2. This is pretty huge. Very, very interesting. Luftwaffe battle group. Paradrop reserve entry abilities positions are now interchanged in the battle group tree. Okay. So they're swapping those out. Very interesting. Fallschirmjäger Paradrop manpower cost increased from 340 to 380. Fallschirm Pioneer Paradrop manpower cost increased from 260 to 280. Recharge time increased from 60 to 75 seconds. All right, so they're just addressing these high impact airborne, call-in units, making them a little bit more costly all around. That's fine. Mechanized battle group, 8 red armored car, command point cost reduced from 3 to 2. Okay, so that's going to supposedly get out faster. Straustruppen assault package, command point cost reduced from 2 to 1. Wow, that's super good. Super good. That's really, really powerful. Stuck 3D assault group, command point cost reduced from 4 to 3. I think this is the most impactful one. I don't know. We'll see. Mechanized assault, munition cost increased from 80 to 120. Pretty substantial. All right, British forces. The British forces' dominance with mass infantry backed by powerful upgrades led to impressive gameplay and reduced build and unit diversity. Okay, we have significantly reduced the effectiveness of these strategies, requiring the faction to rely on combined arms to get most of their units. That's good. Thank you, Relic. Bishop self-propelled gun. Barrage recharge time increased from 30 to 45. BL 5.5 inch artillery emplacement build time decreased from 70 to 40. Yeah, this thing took forever ever. I couldn't believe how long this took. 70 seconds. I remember thinking like this was just like the longest build time ever. Okay, Centaur. The Centaur has been approved to push the unit towards a mobile anti-infantry vehicle that deals steady damage to infantry while being able to disengage from most threats. Area effect radius increased from 4 to 6. Cost decreased from 380 manpower and 80 fuel to 360 manpower and 75 fuel. Horizontal traverse speed increased from 25 to 50. Reload speed decreased from 6 to 4.5. Smoke shot veteran ability now only fires 1 round. Speed increased from 5.2 to 6. Huge. I don't know who builds a Centaur, but hopefully sees a little bit more love. All right. CMP-15 CBT AA truck. We have adjusted the AA truck to primarily be geared to shooting down aircraft. Okay. We'll be revisiting this unit in the future updates. What this means is this unit is not very valuable right now. They're going to make it an anti-aircraft unit, so at least there's some value to it. But pretty huge buff. Look at this, from 600 to 1,000%. That's their range bonus. Horizontal traverse speed increase from 120 to 160. Damn. Now deals plus 50% extra damage against aircraft. That's huge. Range reduced from 45 to 40. Still good range. That's still fantastic range overall. Okay, so this is a big buff. If you need anti-air, it's a relatively cheap way to do that, I guess. Commando light machine gun section manpower cost reduced from 350 to 320. Population cost reduced from 9 to 8. Okay, and commandos cost decreased from 4 to 31. These units are pretty strong, guys. So these might seem like small changes, but very, very good units, high value units. So you'll probably see more of this in the future in this upcoming meta. Crusader 2 fuel has been increased to better reflect the performance of the Crusader. Fuel cost increased from 60 to 70. Yeah, I think that's fair. This always felt very, very cost efficient to me. 60 fuel for the Crusader, which was very formidable even into the late game. I feel like that's a good change. Dingo, coordinate barrage and decoy flare range decreased from 60 to 45. Okay, so that's the flare range. That's fine. Coordinate barrage cost decreased from 45 to 35. I feel like the artillery at 45 is fine. I don't know why it's even cheaper now. As if the British need more access to artillery. 35 munitions, that's very, very good value. I don't know if I love that. Distribute medical supplies duration increased from 15 to 45 seconds. Okay. And distribute medical supplies recharge time decreased from 180 to 120. So more utility for the Dingo all around. The Dingo is going to be even stronger. Infantry sections. The following change now forces infantry sections to be in cover to gain their Veterancy 1 ability bonuses, making them less effective when in the open. This is a throwback to Code 2, if any of you guys remember, or most of you guys have played Code 2. I like this change. Base of fire passive veteran ability now requires the unit to be in cover to activate. Coordinated barrage cost decreased from 45 to 35. Wow. So once again, that is so effective. Giving infantry sections more utility to be able to deal with enemy emplacements, AT guns, machine guns, support weapons. This is what I'm talking about. Smoke and access to coordinated barrages. And wow, that just seems like a very cost-efficient ability. Matilda 2, population cost from 14 to 13. Okay, nice. I like the Matilda. Royal Engineer section, build time increased from 16 to 20 seconds. Okay. Training Center upgrades. The Training Center provides excessive value for its cost. Could be confusing for players and enabled veteran British units to heavily outscale their opponents. We have streamlined the combat bonus to only apply once and remove the damage bonus. Oh, wow. That's a huge nerf. This significant reduction should maintain British units' early to mid-game power, but result in notice drop in the late-game scaling. Combat bonuses now only apply once to units with at least one level of veterancy. Damage bonuses from all upgrades removed. Whoa. Upgrades buff no longer stacks per veterancy level. It is now a consistent 10% bonus that is applied only once. So if you guys remember, if you guys have watched this, Alpern did a video just recently, which is now obsolete, unfortunately for him. But he showed that these were giving 33% bonuses across the board at veteran C3, right? So roughly, I believe 10% prevention. Now it's now a consistent 10% bonus is applied only once. So instead of 33% overall, you're getting just 10% overall at the end of the day. So huge nerf. That seems a little heavy-handed. With this level of nerf, I would have liked for them to change something or add something or buff something else. You know what I mean? Because now it's just like, wow, that we'll see. We'll see if it's still effective. But overall, this seems like pretty heavy-handed. Vicar Heavy Machine Gun Team, build time decreased from 45 or 41 to 30 seconds. Sorry, guys. I'm like starting to lose my train of thought here. This is just a massive wall of text. British Forces Battle Groups. Okay. Air and Sea Battle Group, Hawker Typhoon Anti-Tank Loiter Command Point increased from 3 to 5. Incendiary Bombing Run Command Point increased from 1 to 3. Naval Blockade, duration reduced from 60 to 30 seconds. Munition cost reduced from 80 to 50. British Armored Churchill Black Prince Command Point increased from 6 to 7. Yeah, the Black Prince was really good. So I'm happy to see that. Indian Artillery. These changes to the battle group better reflect the power of volunteer infantry and its role as a middle to late game option that requires the player to commit to the end of the battle group tree. I like that. Warcry and volunteer infantry positions swapped. Command point cost for both abilities unchanged. So basically, yeah, so basically you're going to be able to Warcry earlier if I'm reading this right, and that's just going to give you a more ability to close the gap on your opponents. Once again, that's more utility against support weapons. 4.2-inch heavy motor cost increase from 440 manpower to 440 manpower and 20 fuel. I think this is fair, especially considering you're getting a vehicle out of it, but also if you're investing in this heavy motor, which is very, very effective in that early to mid game, especially, there should be a cost. And here the cost is going to be slightly later armor potentially or tech because of the fuel cost. I think this is fine. I like it. Perimeter monitor cost increase from 150 to 220. Pretty substantial. They love buffing and nerfing things by 50%. That's pretty funny. Okay. Africa Corps. Here we go. The Africa Corps were oppressive in its middle and late game. Yeah, so if the Africa Corps got to the late game, they were so hard to beat. And I started noticing that in the late game and team games. I was like, man, the Africa Corps, they're just, in the late game, they're just so strong. They have so much cost efficiency and value out of their upgrades. Okay. We are making minor adjustments to even this out by strengthening its early game and reducing the power of their armory upgrades. Okay, by strength. Okay, so yeah, the Africa Corps had a really slow start, but they were able to slowly gain value and get ahead as the game progressed. So as long as they didn't die, they would generally do extremely well. So now they're improving their early game, which I think their early game infantry was pretty lackluster. But they're reducing the power of armory upgrades, so universal upgrades for the units and vehicles later on, which have that high impact in the late game when you're able to purchase all those upgrades. So I think that's a good change, but this is a very general thing. So we're going to have to figure out, this is a big change overall. So we're going to have to figure out how that affects the faction over time. 250 Light Carrier, these changes should allow Africa Corps players to delay building, dedicating healing. I like that, especially because it's a mechanized faction. 20mm autocannon conversion cost reduced from 75 to 60 munis. Build time reduced from 40 to 35 seconds. Distribute medical supplies duration increased from 15 to 4. Whoa, that's pretty big. 15 to 45 seconds. Distribute medical supplies recharge time decreased from 180 to 120. Advanced field repairs. Manpower cost reduced from 250 to 200. Booby trap armor reduced from 35 to 1. Emergency repair kits, manpower costs increased from 250 to 325. Fire support elements cost reduced from 150 manpower and 45 fuel to 100 manpower and 40 fuel. Flak 36 88mm AT gun build time increased from 30 to 45. Okay, that's a pretty huge increase in time. Flak Virling half track is having its effectiveness increased to better reflect its timing and roll durability, but high power unit accuracy increased from 40. Angle scatter reduced from 8 to 3. Burst duration increased. Weapon cooldown reduced. Weapon long range cooldown multiplier increased by 50%. Okay. Don't know how this is going to impact, but very interesting. Gustatori have been adjusted to remove their anti-vehicle snare, focusing their role as an anti-infantry and anti-garrison unit. Their cost has been reduced to reflect this. Okay, so what's the change? Anti-tank satchel ability removed. Manpower cost reduced from 440 to 400. Now able to plant regular mines. Whoa, that's pretty good. That's really good. T.35 gas method blade now requires adventure level 1. Okay. All right, so basically they're removing the anti-tank ability because these things were incredible against infantry and also had anti-tank capabilities, which you don't want units with all-purpose roles. Manpower cost reduced from 440 to 400. That's fine. I still think 400 is expensive enough. I like that they're not able to deal with enemy armor, especially light vehicles as well. The fact that they're able to plant mines makes them a lot more versatile in terms of their utility. This is fine. Okay, Crouch shoots in motorcycle. Build times are being reduced to improve the standard F-core opening. So build time reduced from 35 to 30 seconds. So this is going to hit the field much quicker and be able to cap. This thing caps quickly. It moves quickly. I personally love that change. L640. The armor has been increased, pushing this unit towards a low health vehicle that is immune to heavy machine guns and small arms. Okay. I like that. That makes sense. Because, yeah, machine guns did do a lot of damage to these lightly armored vehicles. Armor increased and flamethrower munition cost reduced from 75 to 50. Okay. The Liege 18 support gun build time reduced from 61 to 45 seconds. Damn, this thing was really long. This is almost as long as the British artillery emplacement at 70 seconds. This is ridiculous. What a joke. Absolute joke. It's good that this is at 45 seconds now. MG35, or I can't read anymore, guys. MG34 HMG team. Build time set to 30 seconds. Okay. Pack 38 AT gun. Manpower cost reduced from 290 to 260. Okay, we've seen this. Panzerjäger. Tear gas shot ability no longer creates a white phosphorus cloud explosion effect. The performance is unaffected. Okay. Panzerjäger squad. Build times are being reduced to improve the standard F-core openings. Build time reduced from 25 to... So these, once again, hitting the field quicker. I think that's good. Rapid advance. Manpower cost increased from 250 to 325. Oh, wow. Feels a little heavy-handed, but Stug 3 assault gun. Acceleration increased from 2.5 to 2.67. Deceleration increased from 3 to 4. Rotation rate increased from 30 to 40. Support advanceability range reduced from 60 to 45. Support advanceability toggle recharge from now from 0 to 5. Guys, I'm on my last leg here. Tungsten rounds is having its damage bonus removed as it added too much passive power for Africa Corps vehicles against infantry and vehicles. Penetration bonuses have been slightly increased to compensate. Damage bonus removed. Penetration bonus increased from 20 to 25%. Vehicle survival package. We are lowering the durability to bonus so most vehicles, when combined with emergency repair kits, can survive one additional hit rather than 2. Health bonus reduced from 80 to 40. Oh, wow, dude. I don't know, man. I feel like with these changes, DAC is getting hit pretty hard. That seems pretty brutal. Right? Am I wrong? Health bonus reduced from 80 to 40. That seems pretty brutal. But maybe the vehicles were super oppressive. Maybe they want to move away from too much overuse of vehicles, too much prevalence of vehicles, and more towards the infantry. We're going to have to see. All right. Battle groups, armored support. Assault salvage command point cost reduced from 3 to 2. Panzer 3 flame tank cost, command point cost increased from 3 to 4. That's good. Panzer storm command point cost reduced from 3 to 2. Superior Fire Drills command point cost reduced from 2 to 1. Stuka AT Loader command point increased from 3 to 5. Wow. Veteran Gunners command point cost reduced from 2 to 1. So, wow, man. DAC is getting beat up. Italian Combined Arms. Force Recon command point cost reduced from 2 to 1. Secure Location command point cost reduced from 2 to 1. So, once again, DAC looks like it's hit or miss, I guess. I don't know. Italian Combined Arms is getting a slight, I don't know, Force Recon command point cost reduced from 2 to 1. I don't know how effective this is, but perhaps it's a buff. All right, guys, and then there's bug fixes. This was not a massive bug patch, but I'll go ahead and read them for you. Why not? Dingo is now properly affected by Training Center upgrades. Fixed an issue where all martyrs would take additional damage on rear hits. Fixed an issue where improvised armor did not apply to M4A1 Sherman and the Whizbangs. Fixed an issue where mines would suppress retreating units. I do remember that, actually. Fixed an issue where paratrooper carbines did not ignore cover at short range. Fixed an issue where the commando grenade had minimum range. Fixed an issue where the Training Center upgrades would not apply. Fixed an issue where the Wehrmacht 8 Red Armor car did not share the same mobility or autocannon stats with its Africorps counterpart. Fixed an issue where the white phosphorus round for the MG42 would cause a blind effect on vehicles. That's interesting. Didn't know that. Fixed an issue where Veteran 3 was not providing the correct bonus to anti-tank guns. Wow, that is absolutely needed. And the last bug fix, Regal Mines now properly camouflage and trigger. Okay, all right, guys. So that's going to be the entire patch. We made it. Next time, I'm going to have a hot cup of water to read through that because I am struggling. But guys, I hope this was helpful for you. To be honest, I think this patch is a fantastic step in the right direction. Hats off to Relic. You guys are doing a great job with this update. I like this a lot. I like their perspective. I like their vision. I like the way they're approaching the game. I think they're going to be releasing more updates to come soon. I think they're going to start rolling out quicker. And guys, this should be a much better meta. So if you did enjoy this video, go ahead and smash the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. It goes a long way in supporting the channel. And I'll see you guys on the next one.